I just want to share some of the things that I went through and some of the tips and tricks along the way that I wish I would have done a little better when finding my way in the business world in particular. So if I just go over the quick agenda for today, I'm going to first talk a little bit about myself, but Nidat probably did a better job than I even will talking about me. She did a very nice, kind introduction. But next we'll go into what I call finding the sweet spot. So it's a balance of doing both what you enjoy and also what you're good at, what you're suited for, what skills you have. And so that's why I call it the sweet spot. It's that perfect blend between really being equipped to succeed in a role, but also liking it while you do it. Next, I'll talk about networking. A lot of people think of networking as just this one big overarching concept. I want to break it down into like 2 particular types of networking, how to approach them differently, and what you're really trying to get out of each of those 2 different types. And then lastly, once you've finished, once you've gotten into a role, once you're working in a role, how to actually recruit from a passive standpoint, and how to groom your network and to maintain a strong network for the future. Because a lot of people, when they get that role that they wanted, they sort of fall off from networking. They think that networking is only a means to getting a job very actively, when in reality, some of the best opportunities.
اسمعي استني احكي احضر.
One of the things that I just encourage everyone to do during the conversation is to, like that mentioned, just write some comments in the chat for questions you may have that we can either address during the chat or afterwards. But I want to keep things relatively high level at first. And so if there's a particular area that you are particularly interested in, we can really dive deep into that one area, and I can share a few more tips, tricks, and real life examples for how that's worked for me. So about me, very briefly, I work now as a venture capital investor at a place called Emergence Capital, and we invest in early stage enterprise technologies. It's a role that I've been in for a little under a month now, so really new to the role, really liking it so far. But I can talk through a little bit if people are interested on how that process looked and why I chose that. But before that, I was at LinkedIn doing both corporate development and strategy for a few years. Corporate development being the mergers and acquisitions group at LinkedIn, and strategy encompassing go-to-market, so being sales and marketing strategy, but also working on the product with product strategy. And before all that, I went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where I studied finance, strategy, and I also studied Islamic studies. And I remember just a funny story about that is when I went to the Islamic studies department to finally declare the degree, they were like, okay, so what school are you in? And I said, oh, I'm in a business school studying finance. And the look on their face was complete bewilderment. They've never seen someone study both finance and Islam at the university before. So I was able to marry the two, and I actually ended up writing a thesis on Islamic finance. So would love to connect with anyone here that is interested in Islamic finance, has experience with it. I'd love to learn from you all if you do. So. And then personal, I think what makes Localized really special is that there is this underlying bond that everyone has. For me, I'm a first generation Palestinian American. My dad is from Tulkarem, Palestine. And my mom was from a place called Yibna, but grew up in Doha, Qatar. I currently live in San Francisco. I work in Silicon Valley and in the actual city, downtown. And I previously lived in Detroit, Seattle, Istanbul, Doha, doing a bunch of other things around the world. And outside of work, if you do want to connect with me about something not work related, I love all things martial arts. So I love boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and Muay Thai. Those are some of my favorite things. So to get started on this concept of a sweet spot, I put in a quote from Steve Jobs, naturally being here in San Francisco. But this quote's really important to me, which is, your work's going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. So that's the whole onus behind this conversation, which is how do you actually find that thing that you love? And so we're going to walk through that just a little bit. So this is the framework that I use. I admit that I wasn't a consultant myself, but all of the managers that I worked with at LinkedIn and learned a tremendous amount from were ex-consultants. And if you know anything about consultants, they love frameworks. They love breaking things down. And one of their most favorite frameworks are a 2x2. And so if you look at this 2x2, you see in the y-axis, you have what gives you enjoyment. And I'm actually going to push that a step further and actually define it a different way. What gives you enjoyment isn't necessarily just things that you think you like, but think about it more in terms of what gives you energy. What makes you get up in the morning and feel excited and you feel energized by? As opposed to the opposite being, what actually sucks energy away from you? Like, are you the type of person that likes to go to a conference and thrives on having conversations? Or are you the type that feels drained at the end of the day and it really takes a mental and emotional toll on you afterwards? Those are the types of ways that you should think about what gives you enjoyment, because while you might think you like something at first, in the long term, if you're not getting energy from it, it's going to be an emotional drain on you and you might not be well suited for that career. The next thing is what you're good at. And this is pretty objective, right? Like if you are a quantitative person and you feel like you've excelled in math, then maybe going towards a more quantitative field rather makes more sense. Or if you figured out, hey, I actually hate numbers, I hate math, I don't want to do anything quantitative ever, then I probably shouldn't do something that's very quantitative in a career. So if you think of the 4 boxes, obviously up and to the right is the sweet spot. It's I'm doing something that I really enjoy and I'm actually pretty good at. And those two are going to perpetuate on themselves. If you enjoy something, you'll start to like it a little more. One call out here too is that don't assume that this is just a completely static framework as well. It is dynamic. Just because you're not good at something today doesn't mean you can't be good at it tomorrow. But that does mean that it will take a few steps along the way to actually get there. And so you might have to take some stepping stones in your career journey to really land the role that you want if you're not necessarily that great at it today, which I admittedly have had to deal with before. So I'm going to give a couple examples. As an Arab American boy, my dad really pushed me into medicine. And so when I thought about it in terms of this framework, which at the time I didn't know this framework, it really boiled down to the fact that one, I just really did not like it. There was something, if I go back to my early childhood, I hated going to the doctor's office. I hated hospitals. I don't like blood. I don't like anything. I don't like giving blood. I don't like looking at blood. So I was really low on the y-axis for what gives me enjoyment. I really didn't like it. But then also, I had to be pretty frank with myself. As far as all the science classes I took some dissection courses and so on and so forth, and I really just wasn't good at it either. I didn't get the highest grades. I didn't like the material. I didn't feel like I was excelling at the material. Do I think I could have been good at it if I really, really tried hard? Sure. But moving up on that what gives you enjoyment meter would be really difficult for me. And so that's why I call it no man's land. If you don't like what you're doing and you're not necessarily great at it today, it's probably not a great place to be. So another example is corporate finance. So in a previous life, I actually didn't mention it in the About Me section, I worked in financial planning and analysis at Microsoft in Seattle. And there were a couple of things I really loved about the job. I mean, I worked in tech at a pretty cool company that was going through this cultural revolution. I don't know if people have noticed over the past 5 years, but Microsoft has really taken off. And so being a part of that environment was great. Things were going really well. But when I really look at the work I was doing in particular, it didn't give me enjoyment. I didn't get energy from it. I had to really extract the environment that I was in and the work culture, being tech and Microsoft and West Coast, from the actual work I was doing, because the second is actually going to trump the environment pretty quickly. While I do think the environment's really important, we can talk about that briefly afterwards, it still is very important to also know that you're liking what you do every day and what your responsibilities are, because what your day is going to be comprised of is going to be that work. And within corporate finance, it was pretty quantitative. And I consider myself a quantitative person. So I felt I was relatively good at it on that scale, but I didn't like it. I didn't like sitting at a computer. I felt drained at the end of the day just being in models and crunching numbers all day. So I consider that territory. And what I mean by that is it's not the worst place to be. And had I continued to do corporate finance, I think I would live a pretty good life. I'd be relatively happy, so to say, but I wouldn't love my career. And my career would actually be an afterthought, which for some people, if your career is one of those things that it's just something you do a couple hours of the day and then go home and do other things, that's great. But for me, I really wanted to make sure that I was optimizing for doing something during the day, being my career, that I actually enjoyed as well. And it really takes the monotony out of working 5, 6, 7 days a week. So another example, more of a joke example, but a real one nonetheless, is playing basketball. So you can't see how tall I am over webcam or over audio, but I'm not the tallest person in the world. Pretty short, actually. And I couldn't shoot either. I had a really bad shot in basketball. So I think those two things mixed together prove pretty objectively that I'm not good at basketball. It makes me very sad to think so, as the picture probably suggests of Michael Jordan crying. I assume that I was in a similar place when I didn't make my 6th, 7th, or 8th grade team trying out for the basketball team. But I did love it. If someone told me, hey, you could join a basketball team, you could be on the Lakers tomorrow, I would quit my job and do it. I like it quite a bit, but I had to be realistic and know that that's probably not the right path for me to go down. So how do you get to the sweet spot? And candidly speaking, maybe I'm not in the sweet spot. And you'll never really know, but you can have a pretty good guess. And today, I've spent some time in this investing role, like I said, about a month now, but I actually spent some time investing while I was at LinkedIn in our mergers and acquisitions group and our venture arm within LinkedIn, and that was something I loved. And so when I found that out during my time at LinkedIn, I knew I really wanted to get into a pure investing role outside of a corporate environment, which is why I went on this journey to figure out how can I break into tech investing. And it really, to me, maximizes those two things. I love the social aspect of it. I love the strategic aspect. I love being quantitative still, but it not making up the majority of my job. And I think it blends a couple things that I like. I like being social. I like being quantitative. I like being strategic. And so putting all those things together, I really feel like I've landed myself in the sweet spot. And as the rocket ship suggests, when you are in that sweet spot, your career will really take off, and you'll start seeing a lot more reward doing something you love. Cool. So I want to break into the next session, which is around networking. And the reason why I want to get into networking now is because networking is the only real way to find out what your sweet spot is. Other than actually doing the roles itself, networking is a good way to get a proxy for, hey, is this something that I think will land in my sweet spot? And so for that point, Sally Krawcheck, she's an investor, a women's investor. She invests in women technologies. She mentioned that networking has been cited as the #1 unwritten rule of success in business. Who you know really impacts what you know. And I know this quote says business, and we have some people from different backgrounds on the call today, but I would argue that it's not just for success in business. It's for success in just about anything career related. Because who you know really dictates the types of things you know, because you're limited by your own knowledge, right? If you have a network of people that have different perspectives and different experiences, being able to learn from those people really will impact what you know at the end of the day. So the two types of networking, and I'm sure you could break it down and think of a few others. So like I mentioned, the former managers of my network consultants wouldn't be super happy with me because it's not a completely exhaustive list. But I think these two things are really key elements of networking, especially in terms of finding a career that you do love. And I'll start with exploratory and what that means. Exploratory networking means I'm not quite sure what I want to do, but I have a general idea from some online research. And so the first point around exploratory networking is I started with a simple online search. I have an idea of the maybe 5 things that I'm remotely interested in, and now I want to find out a little more about them, right? Still relatively high level. So to give you an example, for me, it was I decided I don't want to do anything medical related. From my first example that we walked through, I decided, hey, I want to do something more in the business world. And that's pretty vague. But I said, okay, if I want to be in business, I want to do something finance and strategy related. I don't want to do anything accounting based on the accounting classes I took. I don't want to do anything on the business law side of things based on those classes. I don't want to do anything supply chain and so on and so forth. So I kind of chose this area within the business world of finance and strategy. So maybe investment banking, consulting, venture capital investing, or internal strategy at tech companies. So I laid down all of those types of roles for myself. And then I said, okay, now I want to go into those few potential interests of mine and talk to some people. And here's where some of the tools that we mentioned at the beginning of the call really come in. So tools like Localized and LinkedIn will help you get a warm introduction. And sorry for those that already know the distinction, but I'm going to go over it pretty quickly, which is that there's a difference between a cold introduction and a warm introduction. Cold introduction is, I just went on LinkedIn, for example. I don't know this person. No one's connected me with this person, and I'm going to shoot them a cold email or a cold message and say, hey, I see that you work in, I don't know, investment banking. I'm really interested in what you do, would love to chat. That's a cold email. A warm introduction is reaching out to a friend that you know is connected to that person, a mutual contact, and saying, hey, do you mind connecting me with such and such so that we can have a conversation? And then being connected by someone who carries a mutual bond between you. So when we look at Localized and LinkedIn as 2 different platforms, I would urge you all to start with Localized. I think it's a great opportunity to start building a network in that few potential interest areas that you may have, because you have this really warm environment to begin with. And even reaching out to someone without a quote unquote mutual connection is okay, because you have that mutual connection being this group. Being a group environment where that mutual underlying bond is the fact that we come from similar backgrounds in the world, and everyone here that's already on the platform has self-opted in to helping one another out. So whether it be another mentor or mentee, you can have those relationships and start asking questions, and they are the perfect starting point to have conversations about some of the topics you're interested in. I'm actually going to pause there, and Nida, if you're still on the call, would love to get your take on best practices on the platform itself.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that, Yazan. And you're absolutely right. I think what makes Localized unique is that we are bringing experts that actually care about the Arab world. Not only are they from the Arab world, but also many of them are originally from there, have studied at some of these universities that many of you are attending. So really that the power of the warm introduction, as Yazan is mentioning, is critical. And that's what we've done, is we're essentially handing students and young professionals these warm connections, right? And these are folks that you may not have access to outside of Localized, right? Someone who's extremely busy working at a tech company in the Bay Area or working in consulting in New York, but they've chosen to join Localized and share their expertise and mentor students and young professionals. So I highly recommend you take advantage of that. And really, it's as simple as just make sure that you follow as many channels, you interact with the experts of the channels. So not just following them, but asking them questions. And know that these experts can also serve as referrals in the future, right? Like if you end up being mentored by someone at Microsoft, right? And they find an interest in you and they think that you're extremely capable, that could be someone that ultimately introduces you or recommends you if you're applying to the company. So definitely take advantage of those resources on the platform, for sure. Thank you, Yazan.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, Nida, I see that it says that there's less than 1 minute left on the call. I'm hoping it won't.
That happen. I'm gonna try to sort this out. If you get disconnected somehow, please rejoin on the channel. We'll relaunch. There's still a lot more to cover, but I'm gonna pause here and try to go sort that out. Yazan, you can go ahead and continue. I'm gonna try to figure this out.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So back to that point around getting a warm introduction. So I know a lot about LinkedIn just based on the experience that I had working there. And quite frankly, I actually used the tool quite a bit. Ironically enough, to get the job that I left LinkedIn for, I actually used LinkedIn to